Tango 1 at the top. We are at Pop-Up Vehicle. 10-4, Tango 1. You have control. Tango 1 copy. Stand by. Stand by.
Integrity, passion, resilience. That's what this place was built on. That's what our community is founded on. Don't act like the example, just be the example. This is the home of the greatest fitness community in the world. We're trying to create strong, able bodies, resilient to injury with a gas tank to get shit done. If there's one thing from this podcast, it's about taking immediate action, find the problem, fix the problem. This is your opportunity. It's either a hell yes or a fuck no. It's that simple. You're ruining the Tango One podcast. Now is the time to take action. Now's the time to do more and be more.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Tango One podcast. I'm your host, as always, and today I'm here with an awesome guest coming to me from across Canada, coming to you from across Canada. We're doing this one virtual. We have Samantha Panter. Samantha is the creator of Changing the Tide Coaching, which she's going to translate for us because I didn't want to butcher the name of it, but it sounds like a beautifully pronounced, when you pronounce it properly, beautiful name. And consulting, cultural ambassador. She's a DEI strategist and Indigenous advisor. Probably, if you guys are like me, some of these words and terms are new to you. So she's gonna help us to clear that stuff out. And I'm also gonna say, like, before going into this, I'm super excited to talk to Sam about a bunch of things. Embarrassingly enough, I guess I've never had any Indigenous person on the podcast, and we tried actually after some of that stuff went on. But I want to say too, I'm going to say things how I say them, and I think that's part of the learning is if I'm saying things that just don't sound right to you, or it's not the proper word, if Indigenous wasn't the proper word, then I'd stand to do not be. I'm not going to be offended to be corrected, and you don't be offended if I say it the wrong way, I guess.
Absolutely. And it's so funny too, because I love the saying of, if we don't ask questions from a space of curiosity, then no one will ever grow, no one will ever learn. And we're here to learn from each other, and we're walking the same path. We're just doing it in different ways. And I love that. So how you pronounce my business is Kwathlagatla, and it's the Haida Kill language, which is from the southern dialect of Haida Gwaii, which is where I'm from.
Okay. And where are you based out of? Where is this based out of? Is this all remote, or do you actually have a brick and mortar somewhere?
So I currently have a business, a brick and mortar, so to speak, that I actually rent from an elder in a different community on a different reserve. And I live in Vernon, BC.
Right. So, out west too. And I was out there. My grandmother lived out west, and a lot of the land, like my grandmother's house, was leased from like the native people. So not the house wasn't actually leased. I think she owned the house and it was on the property. People out here I don't think a lot of people know that unless they've traveled out to BC or out to the West Coast and the prairies and all those things.
Yeah, any reserve. So for myself here, there's lots of reserves all close by, but because I'm not from that specific band, I have the same policy as, say, a non-Indigenous person renting land. So you lease the land, but you own the building. And so for me, at my reserve at home, so Skidegate is the village that I come from on Haida Gwaii, and I can own land there because that's my reserve. So not a lot of people know that, and because everyone just thinks, oh, well, you're Indigenous, you can just own land anywhere. It's like, no. No.
No, I frankly never thought about that before. Is there must be some that are like, is there somewhere it's like, yeah, you're from this clan and this clan, like we have an agreement? Is there like some of that stuff
well, so the difference is that there's different nations, and then the different nations have a specific system within it. So there's tribes within nations, and then the clans are actually different. So clans were created to stop cousins dating cousins kind of idea. So right. Clan system came in. So on Haida Gwaii, where it comes from, is we have the two main clans, which are the eagle and the raven. And so a raven can't marry another raven. You have to go from another clan. And then there's sub clans outside of that as well. And so it's all, and then they were done just as other ones, like strategically marriages were done. But a lot of times it was, if one clan was struggling and another was quite prosperous, they would bring those clans together to help, because it was all about community collaboration and everyone coming together to help one another through hard times. It never was a competition of sorts.
So who would make the decisions to bring the clans together?
So that was usually like chiefs and ladies held in high esteem within the community. So this is a really cool part, and why my business is very focused on decolonization, and I weave decolonization within all of my teachings, because colonization brought in patriarchy and competition and capitalism. And for me, with my business, where I put my focus is, how can we collaborate? How can we expand? How can we celebrate? So it's about celebrating differences and eliminating divisions. And so where I come from with that, and the history of that as well, is when a chief was appointed, it was actually a decision made among the matriarchs of that community, of that nation. And then the aunties and the other matriarchs would actually appoint chiefs. And then when their ceremony comes in of them accepting their new name, their role, all those things, and the regalia was donned on them, it was actually done by the women. And then if a chief acted in a way that was disrespectful to the title, the role, the nation that they're supposed to be taking care of, their clan they're supposed to be taking care of, the women actually strip a chief and assign a new one.
Really?
So it's a very matriarchal society. And in hideaway as well is you follow your mother. So for me, I'm an eagle. I'm a part of an eagle clan. So my daughter is now an eagle. And then if Joe were to be adopted, because she's not Indigenous, but they do adoptions in that, so Joe would be a part of a raven clan. So it's really neat, the interworkings of it all. And it's very focused on matriarchal. And that's why colonization was so devastating to Indigenous cultures, because a lot of them are heavy in the matriarchal society and the matriarchs running it. And with colonization is all patriarchy. So all of a sudden, the whole concept of Indigenous beliefs and heritage and traditions all got flipped on its head.
So I didn't expect this to go this route, but this is kind of bringing up like some new age type of like problems that I'm seeing. And I read this in an interesting way, and it was like an argument for the breakdown in our family society right now, and like just in society in general, which I think nobody can really argue there's some major problems. But you're saying with the matriarchs and the follow your mother. And one thing I read and was that the capitalism drove women out of the home, and that's become part of like, where do you stand on that? Like if you really think like it does make a lot. Like my wife is homeschools the kids. She was a cop forever. She's half owner of the business. It's not like she has, but when she decided we are going to homeschool the kids, we noticed like a serious behavior change, and just because they're spending more time with their mother. And I often wonder if we switched our roles, if I just became more prominent at the gym and less prominent at home, and she became more prominent at home and less prominent at the gym. I wonder if we switched our roles, if the behavior would be so well. And so I know that's kind of a long-winded and not really a question. I'm just curious on your thoughts on that, because you are a strong woman, but then also we're talking about the mother following the child, and the mother, for that to happen, the mother has to be there a little bit, right?
Yeah. Well, and I always go back to like yin yang, how we are more dominant in one energy. So I look at masculine, feminine as energy versus gender, because that's at the essence of who we are. Like the body that we come in doesn't necessarily match the energy that we align with. And I think that's where a lot of transgender stuff comes from. I'm not a part of that community. I'm not going to speak for that community. That is just my perspective on it. So I look at masculine, feminine as more of an energy essence. And to me, that makes more sense, because I'm learning how to connect and reconcile my feminine energy and what that means. And then also to allow that masculine energy within me to flow and move and work in harmony with it. And I think if we look at both men, women, I don't want to get caught up in gender, but if you identify as a man, you have feminine energy within you. That's where that gentleness comes from. That's where the groundedness, how you nurture, how you self-care, that's all feminine energy. Feminine energy is, I look at it as, if I were to break down the masculine feminine energy into two aspects. Feminine energy is expansive and collaborative. Masculine energy is linear and competitive. It's here's the problem, solve the problem, there we go. Here's how we're doing it. A, B, C, done.
When you listen to the podcast, you're going to hear in the intro, I say, find the problem, fix the problem. It's like one of the, if you haven't listened to it yet. Was that a shot at me? I don't know, but
No.
I'm just messing with you.
I appreciate it because in feminine energy, because we're so expansive, and again, I'm going to use myself as an example. My wife would come home and she always needed to decompress after work. So I would be cooking in the kitchen and doing my thing after work, and she'd come home. She wouldn't really talk to me. She'd just come decompress. And I'd be like, she didn't even ask me about my day or anything. And I would all of a sudden, like this snowball effect, and I'd come into the room and I was like, so what, you don't love me anymore? And Joe would be like, what the hell? I just walked in the door. And that's feminine energy, is we can take something and just explode it into something so huge and big.
Yeah,
but
you can.
Yeah, we're very, very good at that. And another example is, you put a couple women in the group and guess what? We connect, we end up standing in a circle. We don't even plan to do it, but we just stand in a circle. If you want to see an example of that, go watch the playground at pickup. You see all the women kind of collaborating together, and they're talking and they're visiting and they're connecting and having conversations. And then the guys, the dads that are pickup, they're all kind of scattered amongst and running around and with their kids. And it's awesome. It's such a beautiful example of the differences. And it's not to say one's good or bad or better or worse. They have their strengths and they have their weaknesses. And I believe that's why we have a touch of each in us to help counteract and balance that. And the best example that I can think of to use that is, we have a right hand and we have a left hand. If you write with your right, you're a little bit more dominant, but it doesn't discount that your left is not valuable and that it can be supportive and helpful. You just lean towards this because it feels more natural. And I find the expression of masculine or feminine energy is the same.
So with you being married to a woman and raising a child, how old? Sorry, do you care to share? You don't have to share about your kids ever.
Oh no, I totally. She's going to be 7.
7. Okay. So do you find that? Is it just like something that's understood, or is this constant discussion with you and your wife on, who's taking on the role of whatever that might be? Are you more the nurturer? Or is she more the nurturer? Are you more the push, like the other day that my son got hit in the face with the baseball and I was encouraging him to stay in the game, and my wife, of course, and when he comes off, was the one who was there to make him feel better about the injury. Do you find that happens naturally, or is it more of with being 2 women, do you have to figure it out more verbally? That's, I guess, is what I'm saying.
I love the question. And it's in this similar vein of, but I love it because your question is more respectful. But the question that Joe and I used to get is, well, who's the guy and who's the girl? And I just look at them and I was like, we're chopsticks. We're the same. we're getting the same job done. Just our packaging is the same. But to your question specifically is, I find Joe and I do this amazing dance where she'll nurture Naya and I'm more disciplinary. And then there's moments where I'll push Naya more and Joe will be like, oh, having a heart attack. And it's beautiful. And I love the balance that we do. And I love this give and take that we have with one another with how we parent. And the other aspect that I love as well is we have a very specific rule in our house, and I think it's worked really, really well for us, which is whoever does the disciplining also does the comforting. So it doesn't matter who it's coming from, but it has to come from the same person that's drawn that line in the sand. And we have this kind of unspoken rule where when one of us drops the hammer, the other comes in to support, and then we discuss it later. That, like, you were kind of across the line. I supported you because we're a united front, but I want to make sure that, maybe we can handle this better. And then it's an opportunity for us to talk and grow as parents, because as Naya evolves and changes, so does your parenting. And I find people get in that mentality of, well, this worked really well, so I'm just going to keep using it. When you hold a hammer, everything's a nail. And it's, as your kids evolve, allow your parenting to evolve as well. And it's just, as we evolve as people, we need to learn more and change, because it's that constant evolution of expansion and allowing ourselves to grow and change. Because if you're not growing and changing and you're not contributing, I mean, you look at nature, when you stop contributing or having some kind of value, nature wastes nothing. So you're kind of taken out, and then something else will come in that serves that need. And so I look at it as, I don't want nature to take me out yet, so I'm going to keep growing and contributing.
Right. And I mean, I agree 100%. We do the same thing with our parenting, with the, if I'm the person who does discipline, I will be the person who goes in there in a much softer tone the next time, and to speak with them later, and to resolve it and make sure that there's a lesson learned and there's an understanding, and often to admit that, a lot of that was my fault that happened. And right. And where didn't you, I mean, it's the same thing with running a business. What didn't you understand about the lesson I told you that led to this? Like, obviously there's some kind of disconnect there. And then when you said with the nature drawing away, I think that's very true for parenting as well, where something else will replace it. So if you are drawn away, your child will find something else to replace it with, right? Whether that be love, compassion, and that's where, good things can come from that, sports and hobbies, but also some very bad things can come from that,
Yeah, absolutely.
Boyfriends, girlfriends when they're older, drugs, alcohol, whatever that might be, right? They go towards things. In my world, and I know in your world, I'm sure too, you've seen plenty of that happen.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
like, I did have a question. So first of all, what is proper? Am I indigenous? Is it native? What is the?
So for me, you can never go wrong with Indigenous. That's kind of a collective accepted term. I don't mind Indigenous. I prefer First Nations, but that's just a personal preference. I find every Indigenous person has their own personal preference. I know Buffy St. Why am I blanking on her name? I know another person.
Google it.
I feel terrible. Her name is Buffy, and she made a statement to say, well, I'm Indian, don't call me anything different, because that's what I've always been. And I love that statement, because it was so against what everyone was trying to be with political correctness. So I always ask.
I mean, yes, always ask, but do you walk in a room and say, like, what do I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, I have a real good buddy who's a black guy from the, like, way down in the States in Texas, and he's like, man, he's like, just call me whatever. Yeah, I am a black guy. Like, it's an easy way to describe it. And you're like, when I talk to you with my black buddies, I say, my Tony, that white guy I know from Canada. Like, and sometimes I think we get a little too sensitive on, like, it is what it is. We are who we are. And that brings me around to something you said about, like, 10 minutes ago, like celebrating our differences. I think, like, right now we're so concerned about making everybody almost the same that it's going too far, where I don't feel like we're celebrating differences. We're trying to make this, like, blandness out of human beings. Like, we're all going to be what we are, and we should all be like this, and nobody should say anything. And, like, I think it's just going too far. What do you think about that? Like, how do you feel on that?
It's a question that comes up really often, actually, when I work with people. And I'm kind of chuckling, because I was just talking with someone yesterday, and it's like, okay, how far are we going to go? How much longer? Da, 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 da. And I think back to myself when I came out, and there was only a few terms. It was like lesbian and gay or queer. And I'm like, oh, I don't connect to any of those terms. So I'd use lesbian because I was like, well, it's what I got. And I connect to that one more than the others. And I was at a conference, and there was a lecture on two-spiritedness. And I remember seeing that term, and it was like, why am I gravitating to this? This sounds really interesting. No clue what it meant. So I went to the lecture on it and discovered this whole history of what two-spiritedness is. And it was just in that moment, the heavens opened up. There was this huge awakening and connection to myself. And everything just felt like everything snapped into alignment. When you've been training and training and you're trying to get this one thing down and it just doesn't come. And then all of a sudden one day you do it and it just goes, like I call it like poetry in motion. Everything just snaps together and you do exactly what you've been trying to do for how long. And I feel like that's what it was when I heard that term two-spirited. And I immediately connected to it. And I find what everyone's doing right now is they're trying to find a label that works and fits. And I find what's happening is there's so much shifting in context of not just how we hold people, but how we hold gender, how we hold sexual orientation, how we hold religious or spiritual, or just how we hold humans. And the context is changing so fast that it's like we have no time to connect when the context is shifting for somebody else to come in and feel included. And I feel like if we just relax into the movement of what's occurring, not get caught up in the labels and not what it means to you, but it's allow that shift of context for someone so that they don't just feel like they have an invite to the table, but they feel welcomed to the table. And that's what I do a lot with my teachings as well, is I find so much with the inclusion is, well, here's your seat at the table, and be quiet. You don't get to say anything, you don't get to eat, you don't get to do anything. You just have an invitation and you get to sit at the table. But the table, is really big and your chair is really small, and you're kind of brought out for, the parade, so to speak, to say like, hey, look how inclusive we are. We're going to do a photograph for the website. And then now you go back to your cubicle, and I call that tokenism, because, and it's an appropriation of sorts as well. And so when we come from that place, it's not received in a way that feels good to be on that end of it. It's like a pity invite, and yeah, it just doesn't feel good. So I think what's happening is when you have a place in the world and you have a clarity with your context of how to hold yourself, how you show up in the world, and the gifts and the things that you offer, and then someone comes in with a totally different context, and then it kind of goes, well, that doesn't fit with my context. It's not that it doesn't fit for yours, this is their context of the world in a much bigger picture. So I find when I'm getting too like irritated, because I myself even get irritated, I've said some things that I'm probably not very proud of, and that with all these changes and different things happening. And then I realized, I'm like, but that has no bearing on my context. I'm going to celebrate how somebody else found a way to recontextualize their reality so that they feel as good as I feel in the world. And that's the perspective that I take. And I find that way more peaceful inside.
I find that that's much easier to do in a personal, like, if we had 8 people on the Zoom, or we're actually sitting on a table, I find that very easy for me to do natural. Like, yeah, there's some hiccups, but it's just comes out with conversation at questions that seem awkward to get out, but are well received and then well explained. What I think like social media is just, it's exposing us to the 1% of every, if you took every person and put them in a category, it's exposing you to that 1% who is saying like, everybody needs to like be like us. You need to be like me. Like, I think that really is fueling a lot of the like scatteredness of trying to explain and trying to understand. And and having children that are next to you that are hearing these conversations and trying to explain them when I don't, barely understand them myself at this point. I think that's really making this difficult, is that it's like this fire hose of information, and I don't, like, the internet's not going anywhere, but I really think it's bringing a lot more problems than it is good, especially right now.
Well, I find it gives a voice, and I have this new theory that everyone deals with their pain in a different way. And so when I see like rants and different things, all I see now is someone in pain that's expressing it in a really low level conscious way. And when I look at it that way, of seeing them through a lens of this is their limitation versus someone's attacking me, it completely changes how I'm going to hold space for myself and for them.
Right.
So now I just look at it as, wow, that person's really hurting. They picked a really terrible way, in my opinion. Like, that is not how I would do it. And I think because we're always looking at those things through our only perspective that we have, which is our own, and how we view the world, how we're going to hold ourselves, and how we're going to show up. And a person can only project from the level that they're at. So if someone's projecting from a place of pain, everything they're going to project is hurt and anger and frustration and all these things. And I love how you put it as feeling overwhelmed, because I have this theory about what overwhelm is, which is when we feel overwhelmed, it's just because our container is too small.
That's
The
interesting.
container, yeah, the
Interesting way
container
to say it.
that we hold ourselves in, and how we hold that emotion coming through. So then I look at it as like, okay, if I'm feeling overwhelmed by what this person has said, how can I increase my container? How can I hold space for myself with all these bigger emotions that are coming out within me? And so it's always that judgment, because it's easy to look out and judge from our perspective of how we would handle that situation. So then to turn that lens around and get really consistent at it, and looking at those things and going, well, why is this triggering me? Why is this resonating? Because something will only resonate if you have that similar energy within yourself, if you have something within you that's also hurting. So if someone's coming from a place of big pain, and then you're getting a reaction of sorts, then there's a pain in you that is asking to be healed. And it's just the stimulus.
So with the tokenism and things, like, I made a decision at the gym. It's uh this is something I don't like. And you're seeing it right now. Here's a good example: the Ukrainian flag. Like, I'm just gonna take this thing and put it on my Instagram, like, or I'm gonna stick it on my window. It happened with Black Lives Matter. The orange flags that were going around after the terrible discoveries, and with the schools, and and the pride flags. Like, I've been, like, at the garage gym, we've kind of come to the conclusion, like, and I feel like everybody, you're looking at it, every gym, pride is the best one, I guess, of this example I'm trying to come up with. Every gym and every business is now all of a sudden their logo, like my Tango One here logo, my podcast logo, would be in the rainbow colors. I'm totally done with that, because I feel like and it has no disrespect towards anybody who needs that support. Like, my message to our team and to our staff is like, no, we don't treat everybody or the same when they come in our doors, because I think that's if you look at fitness, is a good way to break things down. I'm not going to treat the person who comes in fit, strong, and confident the same way I treat the person who comes in, overweight, not confident, very, like, they have to be treated differently and accordingly, but they're all treated with kindness and respect. And I think that's where we want to go with our business. And we're trying to get off of this, like, using the words, and the people, I just feel like they're just words now. They mean nothing. Like, we're just saying them to say them rather than proving it. So is it with, like, when you're doing this, the DEI strategists and the Indigenous advisors, is that where you're going? Because I'm trying to get my head around if you're against capitalism
Not again.
I'm going to put words in your mouth there, but where I'm coming from is how, as a business who's probably very much most businesses are benefactors of capitalism, how are you meshing that? Like, what do you do when you go into a place? This is such a long-winded question, but I mean, a lot of what we're saying is just, it brings up so many things going on in the world. It's interesting.
I love your questions, long-winded or not. You are just speaking to my soul right now. So I'm just basking in it.
I try to just say what's on my mind and not worry about, you know, I also find if you say things with kindness and it's not something like, you know, when we do our little thing in the gym and we not attacking our team members, but we say what we want to see change. It's not being said to be mean. It's being said out of kindness because we want to work together better. And that's what I hope this is happening. That's what I hope happens every podcast with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I always look at because we'll tackle this part first.
All right.
Primary on my mind, and then we'll go back to your questions. Where I always look at things is when you're going to do something, what's the emotion behind that action? Because we can say do a kind act, but if it's done as obligated, I have to, laborious, it will eventually fuel a resentment within you. And that energy of where you're sponsoring that emotion, where that's coming from, that's what people feel. They don't necessarily see the act. And I think that's the beautiful way to explain what you're saying with the flags and all these things. People are doing it because everyone's doing it. And people feel that, and it's disingenuous. It's an empty gesture.
Right. Exactly.
I was just reading on LinkedIn how a gentleman put together like 10 rules if you're going to put up pride or the trans flag or like all these things. If you're going to do these things, then understand why you're doing it. And I love that we're touching on this because it's so close to my heart, being a woman, being two-spirited, and being Indigenous. I have the same feeling with Orange Shirt. A lot of people don't know why they're doing it. They also buy it from people that are culturally appropriating the Indigenous culture. So it's companies that aren't Indigenous ripping off Indigenous people's designs and redoing it and putting it out there. It's terrible. If you're going to wear an orange shirt, please Google it, understand where it's coming from, where are the roots from, who's the one that started it, why did it start? And then also going into who can I access to have a real, authentic, supporting Indigenous artists for the shirt themselves. You know, I heard so many people like, oh yeah, I went to Walmart and got an orange shirt. And I was just,
Yeah.
they're breathing and offering up things. And then the other end of it, as I've seen companies with the rainbow flag and, you know, all the different flags and that, and we're an ally, blah, blah, blah. And they're one of the most not supporting what the message is saying there. And it's devastating because then it creates this false truth for people that actually are coming from an authentic place and putting it up there, and then people just jumping on the bandwagon. And it's worse. And that was what I loved about what the gentleman was putting out there was, you know, this creates more hatred and acts of violence against trans and other members of the community. And it's so true. And it has to stop. And it has to stop with, when you want to do something, where is that action coming from? Are you coming from a place of making you feel better? Or are you coming from a place of, I want to know and understand the roots of this? And if you do that, then write a story with it, how it touched you, why you're doing it, what does it mean to you, who you spoke with. I'm huge on authentic representation. If you don't have authentic representation, then how do you know? Because the whole point of having authentic representation is you get to hear stories and walk through somebody else's shoes, see through their eyes, feel what they felt. That's where real change comes from. And that's what I mean by eliminating divisions and celebrating differences. And what you're speaking to with like the gym and that example, that's equity. Nobody is treated equal. We have equality with the genders and marriage, and, you know, other things are coming through, and it's not enough. It's not enough. And I just gave this example to a friend of mine yesterday. It's so funny that we're echoing similar conversation. So just a quick example. So we went to the hospital, my daughter was born, and the nurse says to us, so you can go online and fill out the birth certificate. You don't have to worry about filling out paperwork. We're like, awesome. So Joe spends like 20 minutes. And if anyone's done a government website form filling out thing, it's a bit of an adventure down, you know, Alice's rabbit hole. So here, yeah. So like 20 minutes, we get there, she goes to submit, and then it pops up with this message. If you are a same-sex couple, you have to fill out the paperwork and mail it in. Why? Why? Why is it different?
That doesn't make much sense.
Yeah.
It's odd. That's
So,
odd. Yeah, with
there-
us, I just feel like if like we're talking about actions, but like what's your end result of your action? Like what are you looking for? Like what you said, is this just to make you feel good? Like you stamped it and you're like one of the people. And I did it. I put up the Black Lives Matter flag, and you know, and then now that's a whole other ball of wax. Is like you're saying, like some of these some of the things we end up supporting, the money's not even going where we think it's supposed to go, right? Like, but what I'm saying is like, how could you make if my truth was to make some kind of impact, I think it's much better served having a conversation like this that, you know, I don't know, anywhere from 100 to 500, 600 people might listen to this. Like that's a lot, I think, more valuable than me just putting an orange flag on my on my window or on my Instagram. I did want to ask you a question that which came up out of nowhere. So the day they found the schools, there was, you know, the terribleness of all that, the thousands of dead children, and probably way more to come. I felt like the government's reaction was to just say, here's a holiday for you. You know, like how was that? That was me looking from the outside in as just a white guy in a neighborhood that has very, very few Native or Indigenous people. Like, how was that received by your community? And then didn't he fly over top of you guys on that day, like over top of the people that were mourning the losses on that day, something like that. That's a whole other story. Just the holiday in general. How do you feel about that?
I'm not going to speak for anyone but myself. I'll just make that blanket statement. For me, I don't look at it as a discovery. I look at it as a recovery, because the truth has always been known. And the example that I give with that is, what other schools do you know that have graveyards and crematoriums next to them?
Yeah, none.
And it's just a fact. So, and people are like, well, that doesn't make sense. Why are all these kids there? And And I was like, if you look at every residential school, there's a graveyard, and some of them had crematoriums. So we're actually just recovering the kids that were actually buried, not the kids that were thrown into furnaces. So we'll never actually know the full extent of what that whole piece was. And it's, I think, the recognition, I'm not going to call it so much as a holiday, but the recognition.
Right, bad word.
That's okay. No, this is why we're here, right? We're educating one another. And I think the recognition of a day to take it, I view Truth and Reconciliation and like the National Indigenous Day in June that's coming up next month. I look at those days in the same vein that I would look at Remembrance Day.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it. For me, when they came out with it, I'm like, man, it didn't become a stat holiday, so you don't get a day off of. I was thinking, I'm like, when they first announced it, I was like with it, I'm like, oh my God, like we do know that we oppressed and took everything from the Indigenous people. And now all of us white people are going to get another day off. Like, that's kind of like when it first came out, I'm like, oh my God, this is going to cause riots. But yeah. I mean, I guess that's a good way to look at it with the Remembrance Day. I never thought of it in that regard.
Yeah, because it's, and the thing is, and I don't like to say like, this is Indigenous history and this is Canadian history. It's all Canadian history. This is my history as much as it is your history. It's our same ancestors. So how can we come together to have conversations about what our ancestors did?
Well, I mean, as a person growing up, like, how do I not know that? I didn't know about residential schools. I knew nothing about it really. Like, yeah, I mean, maybe from some movies and stuff, but I knew nothing about it. But I know that, McDonald and this guy fought these war, like, and we know all that stuff, but you know nothing about like the dark side of our established where we are right now.
Yeah. Well, there's still a huge petition to get rid of John A. McDonald off of the money. And I know there was talks about it. I'm not sure what's come of that or not, but the reason why there's a petition specifically for him to be off is because they actually released letters. I think it was like 6-7 years ago, somewhere in there, I think. And I've always known this. So like as these things come out, I'm like, yeah, how does not everyone know this? Because growing up in a very culturally rich environment on Haida Gwaii, we were exposed to everything. And I feel because it is so generational that it's just something it's a truth that you're born with. But specifically going back to John A. McDonald, he was the one that coined the phrase, kill the Indian, save the man. And he was actually sanctioning a lot of the residential schools and the stuff that was happening there. And that was his mandate. He was going to save the man and kill the Indian. And that's what he's known for with Indigenous people. And that.
They don't teach that in school either.
No.
So my memories on my phone came up today, and it was kind of like you said about things resonating with you, and I remember this very specifically. So my family and I went away on vacation. I'm not sure if it was during COVID or what. It must have been after, because we stopped at a restaurant on the way home. Here in Windsor area where I live, and being a police officer, I'm gonna be very upfront and say, like, I have very, very few positive encounters with Indigenous people. Like, as a police officer in general, you can speak white people, black people, but Indigenous even more so. I'm generally going to somebody's house when there's a problem. I'm not usually going there to, like, say, how's turkey dinner today, right?
Yeah.
So that I know that plays into it. But so we stop. The story is we stop at a restaurant, and we're having breakfast, and it was owned by an Indigenous couple, and it was not far from, I think, a reservation. I'm not positive, but the place filled up with Indigenous people, and my wife looks at me. She's like, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, I'm like super uncomfortable. I don't like. It was the weirdest feeling inside. This is what's sad. It is sad, and hopefully more people have a little bit of awareness to it. I had never been in a room with that many Indigenous people in my life, and the few times I'd been in any kind of groups, it was a very, very negative,
Yeah.
like, on my behalf, for sure, on their behalf, but it was a negative experience on my behalf. Like, how do we battle against that, especially in areas like mine that just your people aren't here very much, or in great numbers, I should say.
Yeah. I think that was such a beautiful gift that you were given, because
I do too.
you got a small taste of how we feel all the time.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. And in particular, I can see why there would be so much negativity with you being a police officer, and then with Indigenous communities, because it was RCMP officers that were dispatched to get the children when there was force involved. So it was all levels of government, all levels of church, state, whatever you want to look at. Everyone was involved in it. And it's not about sitting here and going, okay, the milk is powdered, petrified, and almost gone. I don't care who spilt it. We're all here now. How do we go about cleaning this up? How do we look at things? And this is such a beautiful statement that was made. And I don't remember who it was with. So I apologize for that. But it was to say, we're the ones as Indigenous peoples petitioning for truth and reconciliation, not truth and retribution. So if that doesn't say enough about the resiliency and where we come from as nations, then I don't know how else that can come across as we're seeking peace. we're seeking truth. We're seeking reconciliation of our shared history, period. That's all we're
Yeah,
looking for. And it,
absolutely.
and it
I
also, yeah,
oh, sorry, cut you off. It's hard with the Zoom. I cut you off. Keep going.
I was just going to say, and that all starts with an honest conversation. And I always go back to Neil Donald Walsh, and love him. And his one quote is, "Paradise is one conversation away." And I feel like by the more that we can have honest conversations with one another of different backgrounds, of different nationalities and culture and heritage, and again, going back to this is celebrating our differences, is we can all sit and have a conversation of kindness and love with one another. And that's how we celebrate. That's how we get there. But we have to have the truth and honest first. We can't keep skipping over. And I feel like that's what we do a lot. And I feel like that's what a lot of corporates and businesses and things do, is they're looking for that easy, I want to go over the tunnel. I don't want to walk through it. Well, no one wants to walk through the tunnel. Let's just be
Right.
clear. Because
Right.
ego is screaming, right? I need to survive, and this is going to be painful, and I'm going to die. And it's like, no, you're not. It's going to be okay. But we have to walk through that tunnel. We have to do the work. Just like you don't walk into the gym and look at everything and get fit. You have to get your ass on the treadmill. You have to get your butt to the bar and lift the weights. We have to do the work, and we can't do the work individually. It's about, well, you do it individually. It starts with you first, obviously. But I mean, it's not enough to just have it as you. You have to open up a space where you can start those ripples and have those cascading effects of change happen. And that only happens by sitting in a conversation where you're uncomfortable, where you're asking those questions that are kind of poking and prodding at things, because it's the only way change is going to happen.
Yeah, I think so too. And I had this conversation with somebody about some different stuff, and I think it was during the Black Lives Matter conversation, was um like when you're a police officer and an indigenous person or a black person, you walk in and granted, I chose to wear the uniform. I wasn't born into a uniform, which is different with the race. Um, there's I didn't do that. You know what I mean? I didn't do that to you, and there's but I do understand why that's the very much difficulty. And I think like when I'd walk into places with a uniform, and I think they don't I think like I'm not a cop anymore. I'm just speaking as if I was one. But I think what happens a lot is they don't realize that a lot of the policeman and the person across from them, a lot of times you're hated as soon as you walk into the room, and I'm unable to recover that. I think that's where if I was, I'm sure you will come across police officers and maybe you can understand it better and explain it to them better. Is that's the frustration with the police officers. I'm coming in as a young police officer, not anymore, but with the mindset that like I am here to help you, but it's hard to help somebody who already hates you when you walk in the room. And I thought that was the massive difficulty in fixing all of this, is like you said it, recognizing that the past happened, but looking forward. Because I think if you're looking to just constantly try to get even, like how could you get even? The only to get even for this we'd like would be war. It would be, and that's where we cannot go. And I think that's what's happened a lot in the world lately.
Yeah. Well, and I love how you're touching on that, because to me, that's the heart of discrimination and racism, is
Right.
stigmatization. As soon as you can stigmatize something, you dehumanize it, and then you can judge it and throw it away and treat it however you want. And that's what people on the other side of you being a police officer is, all they see is the badge and the hatred that they have for what that badge stands for. So it's not about you, it's the hatred for the system that you're a part of.
Right.
Just as people don't hate colored people or indigenous people because we're people, they hate us because of what we represent.
Right, exactly. And I think like I always say, like I'm not comparing people to dogs by any means, but I think it's a good way to think about it. So if you got bit by, I remember getting bit by a dog when I was a young kid, and then you're very reluctant to go around dogs. And so indigenous people, black people, whatever, I think they feel the same thing. On the other side, my story that I told you about being in the restaurant, that's what it felt like, because every time I had been around indigenous people, it had been a fight. It had been violence, or not always violence, but some kind of disruption. And you have that uneasy feeling. And we just need to, the only way, and how do they fix you when you get bit by a dog, Gary, is to actually put you around dogs, right? Like heights, how do you do it? You get up in heights. And I think that's what, like, we need more of this. So we've talked so much about the world's problems. Let's talk about like what you're doing to solve the world's problems. I appreciate all this stuff though so far. What is DEI strategist? What does that mean?
So it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, and looking at it from the perspective of how do we build policies and procedures that support diversity, equity, and inclusion. So for me, I have it on my website even, where it's like, if you're looking for a girl, if you're looking for me to tick a box, then swipe left, I'm not your girl.
You've got the coolest pictures on your website, by the way.
Thank you.
It's
Yeah.
such a nice website. I was on there last night and then got it up today. I always have their stuff up. That's why I'm looking to the side, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm always looking at where's the substance, where's the integrity, where are you actually coming from? And you look at businesses where they put their values up on the board, they have like a meeting and they strategize and they come up with like super awesome values and they put it up on the office and no one has a freaking clue what they are.
That is a speech I give all the time, by the way. Keep going. I love it.
Yeah. And so I'm looking at it as, if you're not living them, then they're not your values. What you live is what your values are. And so this is where we can look at, how do we weave what being diversity means? How do we weave what equity means? How do we weave what inclusion means? And I sat down with a company and we were talking and strategizing about DEI and that. And I said, okay, I love the fact that you're going to create this own policy of what diversity is and what inclusion is and how you're going to do that. And I was like, so where are you planning on putting it? Oh, we're going to make a separate page and put it over here. I was like, so your inclusion policy is going to be excluded from everything else? And they kind of looked at me and I'm like, it's a simple thing. It should be weaved in every single piece because it's about inclusion. So you went inclusive, yet you excluded it. And that's what creates this barrier to moving forward. That's what stops you from living the values that you have, that you've set forth. And again, if you're not living them, they're not your values. You only live what your values actually are.
Yeah, they're worthless. I remember getting in the police department one day, getting in the elevator to go up from my car, and all of a sudden there was a sign on the elevator door, and that was our values. I'm like, who gave me these? I don't like, I believe in that very much. And so do you find that, like, I guess most people who hire your services recognize that they have an area that they need help in, right? I think like, me working with Sean, your friend Sean, that's how we met, Sean Bacon. I think like one thing is like when somebody reaches out to you, they're already showing that they do want to grow in some way, right? So you must get to work with some pretty good open-minded people having these kinds of conversations who just don't know, who want to know. That must be like pretty motivating to you, that you feel like you're making a difference. You are making a difference.
It is. It's slow going because a lot of people don't want to admit that they have a problem.
Right.
How many people do you know that go, yeah, I got a problem and I need help with it? Because we have this culture that we need to be right. And if we're wrong, it's death. And this is where I'm taking my work as well, as I look at everything through the lens of culture. And there is a dichotomy within culture. And so we have this culture that we have to be right. And again, capitalism, and it's mostly men that are in it. So it's competition. So what strong male, competitive male do you know that's going to go, damn, I need some help with this? It's not very common. They're kind of like the unicorn of asking for help and that. So I'm hoping to build more awareness of the powerfulness of what it is, because culture is the master of influence. And whatever culture you cultivate within your business, that is going to influence every single level of it. So if you're not bought in, and I hate that term, but it's the only one I can think of at the moment. If you're not bought into the idea that your company needs diversity, equity, and inclusion, then the culture you're going to create is this isn't necessary. And that's where you're going to get to doing the webinars, ticking the box, have the certificate up on the wall that collects dust.
Yes. Yeah. Ticking the box and like, yeah, 100%. Like it just brings me back to my old life where it was like, okay, on this day we're gonna have the indigenous community come in to talk to you for 1 hour, and you're like, like it didn't solve anything, and in fact, it a lot of times turned into this, both the speaker and the audience was nobody came. Like when we talk about like crisis negotiation, right? When if we're talking SWAT and whatever, crisis negotiation, the first lesson is like when if you were the person in crisis, when I come to you, you're not my enemy. We're looking for a common, right? That's sales. That's how you do sales. That's how you do everything. And I think like a lot of these things, when we come in, it's like this person wants to come in and impose their will, and then these people don't want to hear and they want to say what's wrong, and all we're doing is talking about the problems and not moving forward on that. You must have
Exactly.
come across that. How do you mend that gap when you walk into these rooms?
So where I come from is you're already doing amazing work, but how can we take it from amazing? Because amazing isn't good enough in business. It's excellence. And there's a 1% shift. There's like a millimeter shift from okay, excellent to like outstanding. So how can we get you there? And the other lens that I look at is you don't even know the money that you're leaving on the table because your biases and not living values, maybe out of an integrity, but you could be an integrity for who you are, but it's how can we craft an identity that is a little bit more fluid? How can we influence your culture so that you're no longer leaving money on the table? Because if your biases are getting in the way and you don't even realize that you're operating from a place of tokenism, and say you have an indigenous person or a diverse person that works with you that has this outstanding idea for the company, but you're not going to give them the time of day, or you're not going to give them the space to feel okay to voice what they want to say because maybe it's really out there. And now say that person gets enough courage and they leave the company and they turn into your greatest competitor with their innovative idea because their perspective is unique. And so what are you leaving on the table at this point in time within your own company?
Yeah. So I think you're doing such great stuff, and I love the way that you explain it too. It is, and I think that's a beauty of owning. You're like you own your own thing, and I own my own thing. Is like your my values are this my values. Like it is actually my values because like I very much believe that we're using one cup. Like whether it's business, home, it's all coming from the same energy. I can't the home life work balance thing that we say like really I understand what the idea is behind it, but we're not really separating the two. It's like it's your day, it's your life, your 365 days a year. And so when you say heart first, my very first tattoo was a heart on my sleeve. So I think there's a lot of reasons why we connect. uh and how do you sell that part, the heart first culture? Like I feel like being a let's say like a typical macho guy over here with tattoos and my background, how do you go in and sell me on the heart first when you are going to talk to the typical white guy CEO? If we're not supposed to stereotype it, but like let's do that like in a you know
In a fun
in a
way.
fun way. Yeah.
I would say that you're already living heart first in so many ways, just through the conversation of what you and I are having. See, everyone thinks heart first is like airy fairy. Let's be concerned with everyone's feelings and that, and that's not it. It goes back to the fundamentals of not just treat people how you want to be treated, but treat people how you would approach like an injured animal. And the terminology I use for that is squansinguga. And it's okay, you don't have to pronounce it. And again, that's my way of weaving in my indigenous language for decolonization as well. So every opportunity I have, I try and weave that in because again, that's my value and that's how I live it. And I live my life as consistently as I can, squansinguga, which means I operate from a place of love. So again, when we go back to, that angry person on the internet that's ranting and raving, to see it from the perspective of, wow, that person's really hurting. And what about them is triggering me? How can I heal myself so that I show up better the next day, or I show up better in the next breath for when someone else is hurting? And I love that quote by Maya Angelou, which is, when you know better, you do better. And that's what all this is. And I find the language around DEI, and this is where what has created so much force and resistance, like you were talking about, is it's all, you're doing this wrong, do this better. And it's like, well, tell me how. There's no depth of tools and things that make sense of implementation. And that's where the lens that I take is how we look at culture. What is the current culture? How can we get to an outstanding culture? Because more often than not, you're in an indifferent one. And what I have found is the dominant personality in whatever role they are, leadership for sure. But when you look farther down within a company, is the person with the most dominant personality will actually dominate the culture and influence it.
Yeah,
And so
leadership is derived from influence.
yeah,
Right.
absolutely. And culture is the greatest influencer. So are you using culture, or is culture using you? And is it a reflection of who you actually are? Because you could be a totally different person, like how you are, and then go into a situation where you kind of have to compromise yourself a little bit and things like that. And well, I have to do this to fit in, and then you're looking at those. So it's not people, it's culture. And that's what I like to look at is, you're doing the best that you know, because you're only doing what you know. You don't know what you don't know until someone comes in to say, hey, did you know this? And then they go, no, I didn't.
I've had a few of those moments in this conversation already, which is
Yeah,
awesome. So the
exactly.
last little thing I wanted to touch on, because I don't want it to go miss, because you're saying, we connected already so much, and like how we're on the same page with a lot of these things. When I open up, I always ask what book, and that honestly, it's more so not for topics of conversation. It's because I like to build my list. I read, and
Yeah.
your book is my book.
Oh,
This
amazing.
is the book. So when I take people out on my camps, I hand out like 3 books, and this is one of the Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. That is one of the greatest books, and it's such a short read too. Like everybody should read this book, and fascinating read. And I read it in the first time in the middle of COVID when the gym was closed, and I think I was like in some of my darkest days there. Like it seemed, you read this story and but you know sure share some light on what dark days could actually be.
Yeah.
And
It's a beautiful contrast frame, not just for the atrocities, but also the resiliency of the human spirit.
absolutely.
And I think that's what it is. And I love this difference between like belief and faith. Faith is, um, no one's ever done this before. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm just going to keep trudging forward because I have this inner knowing that it's going to happen. And belief is someone's done it. If they've done it, I can do it. And I find so much Viktor Frankl's book is this beautiful emergence of both faith and belief. And his story becomes a belief for you to say, if he made it through this, and look at the grace of how he wrote that book.
Right.
Like the space that he comes from is just, I mean, talk about stretching. And that is a beautiful example as well as Squanting Kaluga. It's keeping your integrity, keeping the value of who you are, the truth of who you are. And no matter what comes at you, you stand in it. And I was listening to a beautiful Indigenous speaker yesterday. I was on a panel board discussion, and it was amazing because we were talking about cultural sensitivity and anti-racism, how to support Indigenous people within the massage therapy healthcare. And he made this beautiful point, which was an elder shared it with him. When you know your truth, your only responsibility is to make sure that no one pushes you away from it. And I just thought that was such a beautiful statement to make. And for me, myself, in the, opportunities of losing faith, and then it's the other side of opportunities to gain faith. And then when I heard that, it just strengthened so much faith in me. Because being an entrepreneur and trying to make a go of things, and when you're talking about things that make people really uncomfortable, it's hard to get invited in and have discussions and be brought to the table. And so when I heard that, I was just like, yeah, my only job is just to keep holding on to this truth, keep holding on to this faith, because I feel like the value and the medicine that I have, which is what I call my gifts, is my medicine, is meant to be gifted and to help healing, to help that evolution of what the next steps look like.
Well, that's a beautiful way to end the podcast. Such a great lesson. I really believe in that Frankel book too, and it's really comes into what you were saying is how he openly discusses these decisions he has to make. We have integrity and we have values and we have this. When you're looking at the man next to you who's near dying and you have to decide if you're going to take his food, if you're going to take his belt or his shoes, like that's really where, like, I thought that was just mind blowing with that stuff and the openness of that. Like, who are you really? What is your truth? Like, what decisions are you going to make for survival at the cost of somebody else or yourself? And I thought it was a great way to look at it. I think this like, I loved this podcast. I feel like we could go on for like 3 more episodes to really dive into some of this stuff. Like, not the direction I saw a lot of it going, but I'm very glad that it went the way it went for the reason it went there. So thank you so much.
Oh, Hawa, thank you. And I always go into a podcast and I have this mantra, and I'll share it with you, which is just show up, shine, and add value. And that's it.
Yes.
And other than that, I just have total appreciation for what will come, because I know what will come is what's meant to be shared.
I won't say it, but I think you checked all the boxes on your mantra. So if people did want to get a hold of you, how did they do so?
Website is probably the best way, and all my contact information is there. And yeah, just I love sharing conversations. I love networking and connecting. And I also have a women's project that I'm working on as well, which I'm really excited about. And maybe we can talk about that next podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to plug it right now, go for it.
Yeah.
Go for it. Lots of women listen to this.
Yeah, so it's Medicine of the Feminine is what I'm calling the project. And it's sitting down and having Zoom conversations like this with women. But I'm collaborating with a friend of mine. She owns a business called Memory KPR. Her name is Jessica. She is amazing. Absolutely adore her. But she's created a company that's an online platform that's safe and protected. So no one can access it unless they have a link specifically. So any woman that participates in this project, your interview is in a safe, sacred space that no one else can just access. So you can't just Google it and see what it looks like or anything, which I love. I love having that safety. And then we go deep into conversations about the different levels and kind of like climax periods of being a woman and entering womanhood. So the entering into womanhood is called the Red Diaries. So we talk about moon cycles and what your experience was, challenges, stigmas, how the medical system is supporting or failing, and what changes you would like to see. And then we have motherhood, which is a woman's worth. And I find that time period is really when you question, like, who am I? What am I doing? Am I worth this? Am I not? And then the next stage is elderhood, which is what I called Through Her Eyes. So it's kind of this reflectionary of how you reconcile your mortality. What are you looking back on? What is your legacy? What does that look like? And how has the transition from, womanhood, motherhood, elderhood, what does that kind of look like for you? And then I added another piece because culture is my obsession. And it's on cultural heritage and family tradition. So the dichotomy of tradition. So has it been a source of strength and support for you, or has it been something that you've had to move through and overcome? And for me, it's been both. So I've walked both of those, and it was just I'm also opening it up and having other women do the interviews in other languages. So I'm trying to have as many first languages represented as possible. And so far I have 4 different languages in the mix, and I'm just in the building process of it. I have about 3 or 4 interviews recorded now, and it's just magical. It's absolutely magical just to sit with women and hear experiences. And the whole premise of it, again, is knowledge and wisdom that isn't shared is lost, and paradise is one conversation away. And through this medium is also how we start to shed the shame and guilt of these things. And even with the DEI and everything I do is all about shedding the guilt and burden and pain of what shame and guilt can do and how destructive it really is. And it only has power in the shadow. And so by having a conversation, every time we do it, we shed that light a little bit brighter and get rid of the shadow. So it no longer has the power over us.
Very nice. I think a lot of people who are listening, I know a lot of the women that listen to the podcast come to the gym. I think they'll be very interested in that. So if you are, reach out to Sam, please. And I would also like to take a second, thank our sponsors, Murray Insurance and HQ Nutrition, for constantly being there. You can go on their websites and look either one of them up. You guys have heard on here many times before, huge supporters. So thank you so much, Sam, for being on here. It's been great to meet you, and this won't be the last time we talk.
I look forward to our connection again. Hawa, thank you.
Now's the time to do more and be more.